we have a very special episode. I have the opportunity to hang out here in the PwC offices in San Francisco for my trip. And I'm here with Rani. We're going to talk all about what she's been up to and how you're looking at MLOps, AIOps, agents, everything of this sort. We should probably start with a little bit of who you are.
Sure. Thank you, Dimitrios, and excited to be talking to you. I've watched a number of episodes of your podcasts and very excited to be involved.
By your own will, I imagine. You were forced?
Absolutely not.
Someone decided to torture you.
It's 100% of my own free will. But so lovely to be here talking to you. So a little bit about myself. I have about 3 decades of experience in the consulting industry. And over the last 20 years, I've been with PwC. Today, I'm a partner with PwC, and I lead our data analytics and AI managed services space. So with PwC, I spent the majority of my career in healthcare, in payers and providers. Wow. And then over the past 5 years, I decided to make a shift, back into technology. And this was a very deliberate shift where I wanted to move into the managed services space. And the way PwC approaches managed services is we want to lead with automation and AI. So that excited me because managed services, or keep the lights on, is a space that consumes over a large majority of a CIO's time and resources and all of that. And having the opportunity to shape that to be more efficient excited me.
For the uninitiated, what are managed services?
Managed services is the space where we take over support of anything that moves into production. So it's, some people call it keep the lights on. It is as soon as somebody works on a project, it's live with consumers, all of the support related to that software asset, whether that is the hardware, the software, the experience, right? All of that falls into the managed services space. And the area that my team focuses on is data analytics and AI. And I think AI managed services in itself is one of the coolest things that is happening today.
Yeah, you have your work cut out for you.
Yes.
Keeping things in production and making sure that they're going off without a hitch. I imagine there's a lot there.
Definitely. It's an exciting time to be in this space. Because I think AI is an area that has been growing exponentially. And at least in my lifetime, it is the area that's I've seen grow the fastest. And so not only are new technologies and tools being introduced, also the pace at which innovation is happening, which is the applicability of AI, that is also something that I've never before seen, right? The pace at which things are growing.
Yeah.
I would say 12 months ago, I was in conversations with clients where they were talking about investing in AI and experimenting, piloting in AI. Today, fast forward, even in the last 6 months, I would say, I'm seeing clients who have implemented AI and are now are thinking about ROI, how to scale it, how to sustain it, which brings in, right, the managed services component of scaling, sustaining, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned that because I think we went through the exploration phase. Now it is in the phase of, okay, so what can this actually do? And how can I prove that it is better for my company if I'm using AI? I'm sure you've seen the recent paper that came out that was saying people using AI think that they're doing things faster, but in reality, they're doing it like 20% slower. But when they're asked, hey, did AI help you? It's like, oh yeah, it was way better. And we all instinctively are probably a little bit like that, where if we're using AI in some way, shape, or form, we feel like, oh yeah, this is better. But then if you were to compare that with us not using it, I often wonder, and I ask myself sometimes, like,
yeah,
is it better, or am I just fooling myself? And a friend of mine told me, yeah, but dude, look, the experience of chatting back and forth and being able to say like, okay, now go off and do that.
Yeah.
And write me that thing that we've been talking about is so much nicer than having to really like squeeze every one of those words out of your mind and all that. But sorry, I digress. I went on
No,
a
no,
bit of a
it's all
tangent.
good. It's all good. Yeah, I think there is it's probably a two-part conversation, right? There's a personal growth, a personal productivity
Mm,
that which is what you're talking about, and then there is the enterprise growth, enterprise productivity, right? On the other hand, too, and you've got to like take both of these together.
yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
one of the recent studies that I saw said that, if you're not spending, say, 4 to 8 hours a week or like X% of your time learning and studying and upskilling, then you're not going to be AI enabled.
Yeah,
Right. And I think that is true for personal growth, but also for organizations who are looking to upskill their employees. There is a huge investment in terms of training and giving people access to the tools and technologies so that they know how to be productive, right, with all of these tools.
yeah.
And I think there is a whole change management piece
Yep.
that goes along with AI enablement, which if you undermine that effort, then it's never going to be successful.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing
It's a
at the
cultural
end
thing,
of the day.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So ground us in the current state of what you've been seeing out there with IT operations, how you see MLOps.
Maybe let me start with what is the current state of organizations, right? There's tons of data out there. Most organizations I know have alerting systems. So there's lots and lots and lots of alerts that if a human being has to sift through all of it, a lot of it is noise. And I'll give you maybe a couple of examples.
Mhm.
So incident detection today is, it is. So if you get 100 alerts, which one is truly an incident, which one is not, is something that if you have to go through 100, then you're losing time on it. Whereas if you train a model to look for these, this criteria, it's going to pop up, hey, here are the 10% of alerts which we think you need to look at. And then triaging becomes a lot more easier. You're bringing down the mean time to resolution just by doing that. Another example is, when it comes to infrastructure, right? Like the, say, CPU utilization, resource utilization, sometimes tends to be cyclical. And if you are actually monitoring for certain events, you know that the usage is going to spike 6 hours from now or 20 minutes from now. And if you had a system that was looking for these things, then you would know, hey, I need to add more memory to the server.
Yes.
Otherwise, this is going to crash in like 2 hours. So this is what I would call, proactive monitoring, where you're preventing an incident from happening because of how you're effectively using your data.
Yeah.
So those are examples of how I think MLOps and AI ops can be combined to create a very compelling case for IT operations.
Yeah, the predictive monitoring is incredible. I really like that. And then also alert fatigue is real.
It is real.
What about agents and where are you seeing them? What have you been doing with agents? Because that's like the buzzword of this the last year and a half.
Yeah, I think the concept of agents is very real, and we are starting to see, I think, some organizations adopting agents. First and foremost, there's a lot of process standardization work that needs to be done. If everyone is following a different process, then it's very hard to put in an agent to replace or to do a process, right?
Yeah.
So there's process standardization. The second piece is data quality, right? I do not know of a single organization that says that I have perfect data. The quality is great. So, there's and so for these two things, I do see a lot of data modernization, app modernization type of initiatives that organizations are taking on. And so once you have this foundation set, then it becomes a lot easier to go and say, well, these are my standardized processes, and these processes get used 75% of the time. So I would get the most bang for my buck if I were to agentify these processes, right? And and I am oversimplifying it as I'm kind of walking through this, right? But the other piece of it is, I often get asked, should we start with one agent, one process, and then look at how that goes, experiment with it, build a pilot, and then scale it, or do we do multiple, right? And so I've done a lot of reading on this and thoughts on this, right? And what we've seen work is, I think centralizing the management of agents is important because you do not want different people just using different technology within the same organization to build their own agents. So there's some kind of centralization that's required that also then advocates for responsible AI and all those ethical considerations. But then it is okay to start parallel development of agents if there are processes that are being used 75% of the time in 4 different departments. Start writing up like 4 agents. And today, with all the IDs and the low code, no code solutions, it is so easy to spin up an agent.
Yeah.
So I think the majority of the time needs to be spent designing the agent, then a little bit of time writing the agent, and then the rest of the time in evaluating. So the evals and and measuring the impact of the agent, looking for hallucination, looking for biases. That's where then the rest of the time gets spent, right? So this is how like we see a lot of clients like embracing agentic flows, and I think this is still pretty nascent, right? There's not a lot of I think organizations who have agents, too many agents in production, right? I think we are still in that like, I'm building an agent, I'm evaluating it.
Yeah. Yeah. It
Eh,
reminds me a little bit of the MLOps days, early MLOps days when I started the community in 2020, where a lot of folks were trying to get the models into production still. And
Yeah.
it's just really hard to make something, A, that you can clearly attribute ROI to, and then B, something that actually like works.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And my buddy Zach was just telling me this morning, one thing they see is if folks can get an agent on these standardized processes into production quickly, then they start to see where the long tail of their data or their knowledge base is missing. And so, because you run into problems
That's right.
constantly, and then you have to amplify or you have to really enrich your data, and it's almost like a way for you to recognize where you're faulty.
Yeah, I think it is interesting how we build upon these things. And, yes, you get your agent into production. And that's where I think, so that's what makes managed services so exciting for me, because these things are now in production. And then we are tuning, optimizing, training it. So managed services for AI takes on a different meaning than your traditional managed services,
Yeah.
right? Traditional managed services is all about break fix, incident management, make sure the system's up and running. Here, we are not only doing that, but we're also making sure that we are delivering on the right outcomes
Yeah.
that it was intended to deliver to begin with. And that means that we are constantly measuring. And so even the skill set of the people that we have in AI managed services is very different from your traditional managed services folks. We are hiring MLOps engineers, we are hiring data scientists, we are hiring more advanced analytic folks, and who can tune and optimize the models to kind of reduce the bias, reduce the hallucinations, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And so, on that note, right, we also have a framework called Agent OS that
nice.
PwC has developed for our clients. So we can go in. It's all based on Python-based frameworks and things like that. So it's very interoperable, works with all the hyperscalers, has APIs to connect into any ecosystem, and it is an agent framework. So you can build one. You can it's got an agent orchestration layer inside it, and I know there's a lot of them in the market. But when we go to clients, we do go with a framework, and I think that's one of the things we tell the clients, that you don't have to build from scratch. There's so much that's already out there. You should leverage and then build on top of it. So then the focus becomes the client specific business outcomes versus trying to figure out the technology that you need to make this happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because as you know from last night, there's a new startup that comes every day.
Every minute, I think.
In this space. It's a hot space. And
Yeah.
again, there's a lot of unsolved problems. So that makes it ripe for these startups to come up and try and find the best way and the most optimal solutions.
Yeah.
And you said something interesting there where it's different from the traditional managed services because there's not that break fix. And it feels like it is very like random, but not random in a way. I guess that's not the right word I'm looking for. I don't know if that makes sense. Like it's you have to kind of just let it do its thing. Or break fix is very clear because it's doing this thing and it's not working.
Right.
There's so many other things that could be going wrong with an agent that it could be working in that it actually executes, but it's not working because there's all this other stuff that it's doing wrong.
Yeah. You need a human in the loop until it is proven that this model can work without a human in the loop. And there are probably very few use cases today where someone would be comfortable making that that judgment, right? Then, and it's interesting. I think when you talk about humans and agents, there are so many there's jargons that have come out, for lack of a better word. Like there's human in the loop, there's human on the loop, and there's human out of the loop.
Oh yeah.
It is, how many more ways can we use those words
Yeah.
together, right? It's the human in the loop is where you have to approve a workflow, right? Approve the outputs that the agents are coming up with. Human on the loop is where you're approving only the exceptions. So you're comfortable that the regular workflow is something that the agent is able to take care of, and outside the loop is outside the loop, right? So, and I find that very interesting because in highly regulated industries, I think they kind of move or lean towards the human in the loop model, where they are approving everything, not just the exceptions and the norms.
Yeah. I find that fascinating, especially because like going back to the idea of we create these systems so that they can hopefully give us incredible lift.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if we're still in the loop, is it
giving you the lift?
Is it giving
Right.
you the lift? And that's probably the big question that I imagine a lot of these folks are grappling with. Like, how much better are we because we're using this? You know it's there, like, and so you can't say I don't want to do it because you know there are companies that are finding success with it. And I draw this parallel back to like the traditional predictive ML and how you have gigantic companies that are optimizing their fraud detection by 0.01% and saving millions of dollars. And so other companies see that and they think, well, yeah, we have to do machine learning because look at that. But then there's all these nuances of like, yeah, are you at that scale though? Is that the right use case for you? And these questions come into play, and maybe you can start with something a little bit more simple just to see and like put your foot in the water, test it out, see if it works, and actually start having the conversations of what we need to do to get that into production.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, 100%. And I also think that most organizations have started in their back office, playing around with agents and AI and all of that. And that has given them a lot of comfort because it's a more forgiving place to really start, right? And then we are now starting to see them get into their own core products and services. And I think that's the next wave. And this is going to get very interesting because now you have to deliver on business outcomes. And that means there's going to be business people who are actually going to take advantage of that natural language processing. And I think this is why vibe coding is like picking up so much, right?
Yep.
And that's now the latest that we hear about everywhere because they've made it. They, as in the technology companies, have made it so easy for just about anyone to write a piece of code because you can say it in English and then you can get code out of it, right? That's really the whole concept behind it.
And have you seen good ways or ways that you can get alignment from the two sides of the houses? Like, and I know it's normally not so black and white where it's like the tech side and the business side, but maybe where folks are, like you're saying, business folks are coming into this and they're starting to have their say, and they also have needs on how it's being built, and
Yeah,
they play with ChatGPT, so they think like, hey, AI should do this or it
right.
should be like that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I have seen pockets of this, right? So as I think mentioned, my background is in healthcare,
Mhm.
and I'll take a couple of healthcare examples, right? So one is a function, when you go to a doctor, you get approved for the insurance. And so there is something called a pre authorization that's done for services. The pre auth process, right, is pretty manually intensive. Like it involves calling the insurance company to make sure you're covered and
Mm.
so on and so forth. That is a process that I think has been agentified or AI
Nice.
enabled. And and so that works, but they still need to make sure that if something gets denied, by AI, they have a human in the loop to make sure that, this denial is appropriate and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So that is an area where, this cannot be done by an engineer alone. This has to, you have to bring in people from, and I will call this the business, right,
Yeah.
to come in and say, yes, these are the right policies, this is the right reason for a denial, and so on and so forth. And when you build it, keeping the business person's requirements in mind and in the forefront, I think you get it right.
Yeah.
But if you try to do it from the back end with an engineer trying to come up with a solution based on, because you see, as an engineer, you see the data flows, you see there is a call from this system, to this system, and this comes back with, this sort of an answer, this is the data flow diagram. That's how I think an engineer's mind works. Whereas a business person looks at it saying, well, a person comes in with a fever and you're making, asking them if you can get surgery for it, like you're going to deny, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
this is exaggerating it,
Again, this goes back to
right?
like the latent failures or the silent failures where it's failing, but in ways that the engineer isn't going to see.
Exactly. So I think that is where, you've got to take the business input to create these agents, and that's where it becomes more successful. And so the extension to that is, Epic Systems is one of the biggest like
Mm.
electronic medical record systems, right? That's used by a lot of the big healthcare providers. They have recently, the past couple of months, they've introduced AI capabilities into their software. And I think organizations are still adopting, and they're still in that experimenting, piloting mode where they are trying to figure out if this is something that they want to introduce.
Mhm.
But an example is drafting mails to patients, right? That is a functionality that they have introduced in it. And today, people do spend a lot of time drafting those emails. And what the system is doing is giving them a draft. And then, yes, I think you have to change uh, most of them for tone, for things like that. But it's a start that, actually saves a lot of time.
Yeah.
I think, honestly, that's a really good example of, usage of AI.
Yeah, and well, especially if you're piping in, and this goes to a little bit of like a data engineering type of thing, because I imagine the drafting of the email isn't, hi, your appointment is this day.
That's right. Yeah.
It's a lot of random variables that need to be piped in. And so it's not as simple as just having a template.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And there's contextualization. Yeah. Right. There's tonality.
Yeah.
There's so many things that have to be looked into.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So when you're working with companies and you get alignment and then something's actually in production, one thing that is always fun, and as a friend of mine would always joke, like you can never go wrong if at the end of any talk that you see, like at a meetup, you ask the question and say, yeah, but how does it scale? And so whenever I think about scale, I think about that exact phrase. And so I'm going to ask you now, like, how do you scale?
Yeah. I'm going to use that for your next meetup.
Yeah.
But
I'm sure the presenter is going to be happy because she was telling me in like, oh, there's always one person that asks that, how does it scale? And technically, it's a good question because, yeah, you want to know,
yeah.
but also,
Yeah. Right. See, I think of scaling in two different ways. So one is, today's in today's world, the way you go through SDLC, for lack of a better word, right? It's not waterfall, it's not agile, but the way agents are being developed is you spend some time thinking about what is the use case or what is the process you want to agentify, and then, or you want to AI enable, right? And then you think about, you spend a lot of time in design. And then once you have the design ready, the coding really takes very little time. It's the least amount of time. And then the evals and the measurement piece, right? That takes like the next big chunk of time. But once you move something into production, right, scaling is not a problem. If process A is what was automated or was changed, then if the same process is being used in multiple places in the same company, that's an easy way to do it. So coding, right, when you think about scaling, the coding piece is not a challenge because of all the tools that is there. But the second piece is, how do you scale if you got one process right? How do you get the next 10 processes, right? That is what I think takes more time. So this is where it goes back to having a good handle on the processes within your company and standardizing a lot of the processes. If the if the processes are standardized, then I think scaling becomes a lot more easier,
Yeah.
right? And going back to like my example of pre-auth, a pre-auth in the case of a cold or a fever is probably going to look very different from a pre-auth from an oncology department, right? So the process is the same, but the business context is really important. So I think those are considerations, right, to bake in. But I think if you have a good foundation of processes and if you have business weighing in, the coding is not the challenge. It is the adoption. And we went back to culture, right? The change management piece of it. I think that is where the focus needs to be to scale it. And then the third piece I would add is the measurement piece, right? The evals are so important when it comes to scaling because you don't want to scale something that is giving you different outputs than what you want. So as long as you're able to measure and correct and measure and correct, and you have a fairly good model in place, then it becomes a lot easier to replicate.
I look at evals and I had a friend say, man, we tried a lot of different tools, but we realized that the tooling isn't the bottleneck, or the what the tools do isn't where the bottleneck is. What the bottleneck is a lot of this data labeling on, as you were saying earlier, when the business comes and they look at the interactions
Right.
and they say, wait a minute, why are you giving them a hamburger when they ask for pizza? That's not what they're asking for. And so you have those data labeling issues that take a lot of time, because if you're labeling it with humans and you're labeling it with humans at the company and you have a lot of data, that can just be a lot of work. And at the end of the day, that's going to give you the best lift. So he told me, you can do these evals and you can get this LLM as a judge or LLM as a jury, all this fancy stuff. But what we found works the best is just getting people into an office, having a pizza party, and labeling data together.
Well, that and also having a good baseline to start with, right?
Yeah.
And that was the standardization piece I was talking about, right? If you know what this yielded before it was, agentified, then you know what the increase in productivity is, if it's working, all that good stuff, right? Yes, there is, and this is also where we talked a little bit about measuring the ROI.
Yeah.
Right. And to me, measuring the ROI is not just a straight, hey, I replaced 4 humans with 4 agents. So now I'm going to take out the cost of the humans. It's not that, right? Because there is a cost to putting these agents in. There is a human in the loop who is reviewing it for evals or whatever, right? And so there's a cost associated with that. There is a cost of retrieval, storage, and all of that in the back end, right? Which you're not accounting for, which was not there when it was just a human doing the work. And you've got to like compute all of this together to get the true ROI.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of the build versus buy question, where
Right.
everybody thinks, yeah, I'm not going to buy it because
It's too
it's expensive. And then they're like, I'm just going to go hire 4 engineers
Yeah.
to help us maintain it. And you're
Right.
like,
Yeah, exactly.
I hope those engineers aren't based in San Francisco. Let's talk for a minute about some of the sustainability considerations that you've thought about?
Yeah, so I would bucket sustainability into three different buckets. And I think some of it we already talked about a little bit. The first one is environmental, right? So there is the energy use, the carbon emissions, water consumption, right? Are you picking the right sites where recycled water is being used, that sort of thing, hardware materials like e-waste, all that stuff, right? So that's kind of the first chunk of environmental. Then there is the economic cost that we talked about a little, right? So there is the cost of building the agent, cost of the human reviewing the agent, cost of the storage, the retrieval. And when you don't need a large model, are you running a smaller model, right? Are you making those selections very deliberately, right? And that's what I would put into the economic bucket. And then there is a social bucket, right, which is hugely important. And we talk about responsible AI quite a bit. We talk about the ethics associated with it. So that's good. But there's also accessibility, localization, transparency, explainability of the models, right? There's all those kind of things that I would add into the social
Hmm.
bucket. So to make something sustainable, and I think this is what I was saying at the beginning, I think we are just getting into that phase where we are starting to think about what is sustainability? How do you measure the ROI? So far, it's all been about, I'm so excited about AI and the possibilities of AI. Where do I start? Now, people have started, they've deployed a few things, and it's like, now how do I scale? But hey, wait a second, how do I sustain this? So I think these are all going to come in, into the picture a lot more, I think, over the next 3 to 6 months. Or, yeah, I'm saying 3 to 6 months. I would have said 3 to 6 years if you had talked to me a decade back.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so who knows? I do like how you are facing this, you're kind of abstracting it away from the weeds of the tech and really trying to think a bit more big picture and say, look,
Right.
if we want to sustain these efforts, there's certain things that we're going to need to invest in.
Right.
And none of those things are like this new hot tech that or framework that just came out. That's not the big picture type of thing.
Right.
We need to look at the big picture here is how are we going to make sure that we can justify this?
Hmm. Yeah, that's 100% it, because we are going to get there. And think about all the waves that we've been through over the past couple of decades, right? Whether it's the internet, whether it is the cloud, right? Moving to the cloud, it all came back to, like, even you think about the cloud, the CIOs came back to, wait, I'm going to spend a lot of money if I just keep storing all my data in the cloud. Is there a more optimized way of storing the data in the cloud? Right? It kind of, so, and I think that's the next wave with AI as well.
Yeah. I've already heard folks talking about how they're starting to look at the cost and they're starting to think if we do deploy this to production, as soon as you start thinking enterprise scale for that feature, now you're hurting every time the user says please.
Yeah, I think efficiency and perfection has a price. And I think everybody or every company has to decide what is that right trade off, right? Where you want to spend so much money for just so much perfection.
Yeah.
And, everything doesn't have to be 100%.
I'm sure you're seeing it on the different use cases where there's more appetite for risk, or there's less appetite for risk, or there's more appetite to get this into production just because we really need something here.
Yeah,
But on this side, maybe the processes, they're not fully dialed in, and
right.
so we can take a little bit longer.
That's right. Yeah. And it's, I think, the same call or a similar call that a lot of organizations make even in the DR space, right? How much do I need? And how much is good enough, right? You can keep building on that. And those are massive investments.
Yeah.
And I think everywhere it's like the same principles that you've got to apply. I think the skill sets, and the skills that you need both to build and maintain, right, from a software engineering lens, I think that's evolved so much, right? As you're saying, right, the low code, no code IDEs, it almost is like you don't need a full stack developer as much as you needed them. I'm not saying you don't need them at all, but you don't need them as much as you needed
Yeah, it's
them.
like you need them for other stuff. If you're looking at the whole product as a circle, you need them for this part of the circle, and then you can try and get the other stakeholders involved in this part. And
Right.
this was
Yeah.
always kind of the case. I don't know if you remember it. With the ML, you needed stakeholders involved, but they couldn't really act. They had to be in the meetings and talk about things and say like, yeah, but we can't do that because of this or that. But
Yeah.
you didn't have this idea of, well, let's just empower you with a no code solution.
That's right. Yeah. And that's where I think it's becoming very interesting, right? So the skills that you need on the build side is less coding and more designing. And once you design the right solution, it's very little time to code, and then you spend a lot of time in evals and measurement and all that. So prompt engineering, data scientists who can measure, compare, run models, simulations, that comes into the picture. And then on the managed services side, it is again data scientists who can tune the models. The skill set is completely shifting, right? It's not about coding anymore. When you're deploying agents, which is very interesting, right? Because that impacts, I think, the skill set of who you hire, as your like beginner kind of workers, to how they grow, what path do they take to grow, right, within the organization. And I think the business knowledge is becoming more and more relevant. Now you want, yesterday, I think when I was at your event, I heard about how product owners can start coding because you don't need to know code. So the product owners who understand the functionality, who have been designing the product, are probably the luckiest, right, in this whole mix, because now they don't need to rely on an engineer to come out with a code. They can actually code, right? And it's oversimplifying it, obviously, but
I
that
did
is,
hear
I think I do see that shift.
exactly. I've been hearing the term product engineer more and more. And then I also saw the trend of the CPO, CTO, where they're the same person. And so it's like, yeah, it's a product person, but they're technical, and that's the new cool
Right.
thing to do. But I do think that the hard part, isn't maybe it's not in the code. The hard part is in the making sure that if you have an agent, it has the right context. And so there still is a lot of data engineering that's going on in the background, because getting that context, that's all moving data around. And who's really good at that? The data engineers, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So it's interesting how it's all shifting. And it's also, I think, if you raise it up to the C-suite, right, there is the birth of the chief AI officer, right? We had the CIO, we had the analytics and digital, and then now we have AI. And I think with AI, right, it's shifting more towards the business. It's more of someone who understands the business, who can then advise the organization on what are the right AI investments that's going to then impact, the company's productivity and efficiencies and all that good stuff.
We'll wrap up here. There's a few really cool ideas that I'm taking away from this conversation. One being the idea of thinking about your system from this sustainability first. I always thought about sustainability in the other bucket that you put it in, which was like, the hardware, try and reduce, reuse, recycle, sustainability.
The environmental considerations.
Yeah, this is like, we want this AI product to have a long shelf life. So how can we design with that goal in mind?
Right.
And that's probably like the biggest thing that I'm going to be taking away. It is very oversimplified, because of course you would think like that. Why wouldn't you? But I don't know. And it's also easier said than done, right?
Right.
As anyone knows, you're working on RAG today, and then you're working on agents tomorrow, and now next time it's prompt engineering or it's context engineering. And so
Yeah. If I had to talk about future ready IT operations, right, it is really look at it with a business mindset, right? I, I think as we look into the future, like making sure you're stabilizing your current state is so important with data modernization, app modernization, process standardization, all those good things, right? They're all, I think, very important for a large organization to start with. And I also think that, if a company has never dabbled in AI before, start with your back office. Like I said, it's more forgiving,
Mhm.
and then kind of move slowly into your front office as you build that muscle, right, within the organization. Invest in good training and upskilling, right, for your people, sort of thing, because it's not you're not going to replace people like overnight. You're going to upskill them, you're going to elevate them, you're going to still have a human in the loop, and educate them so that it doesn't become a culture of fear, but it's a culture of learning.
Mhm.
And then there's I would say, start pilots in different departments so everyone starts getting excited, but with that kind of centralized governance, if you will, right? So that
Yeah.
there's some guardrails around everything, and take advantage of all the cool technologies that everyone's putting out there. Like the number of AI startups that's out there is just mind boggling, and the names, right?
Yeah.
So interesting.
Also
Uh,
fun. Yeah, that's
Also
so true.
fun.
Uh,
And like Agent OS that PwC has, there's a lot of frameworks out there. Take advantage of those frameworks, because a lot of thought has gone into building those frameworks just to make this journey easy. And then last but not the least, I would say measure, 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 right?
mhm.
That feedback loop is just so important.